UFC Vegas 64, I'm going to give you my final picks. We're going to talk about some prop opportunities and we're going to build some lineups, so make sure you watch until the end. You can call me Kunith. Let's make some money this week. Last week, the dogs barked way too hard. Dustin Jacoby loses a bogus decision.
Why?
Calvin Kattar blows his knee out in the main event. Just a mess all around, but we have a new card, a new week, and I'm ready to get started. Right at the top of the slate, we have $9,400 Miranda Maverick. She's going to be fighting Shanna Young this week. The most expensive fighter on the slate has been coming through pretty consistently lately, and I don't think there's any difference here. I think Miranda Maverick rolls. She's younger, she's more experienced, she's fought better competition, and I think physical strength is going to play a huge factor here. I expect Maverick to dominate in the clinch. I think she gets Shanna Young down easily and does it in the first round, and Shanna Young doesn't have a great get-up game. If I remember correctly, after her fight against Gina Mazzani, she was saying something about how her hips keep her from being able to get up. I don't know what it was, but that's not going to serve her well this week. And not only do I think she struggles to get up, but I think she gets submitted here. I expect Miranda Maverick to come up with a rear naked choke or an armbar in the first round. Because the way I see it is she's going to be able to take her down. She's going to get a dominant position. Shanna Young is either going to allow her to get into full mount or she's going to give up her back, and then it's either armbar, rear naked choke from there. Pretty straightforward. If it doesn't happen in the first round, I think it happens at the latest in the second round, but for DraftKings, Miranda Maverick is super safe, an absolute must play for your cash games, and a solid tournament play if you're able to get there with the salary, and I think on this card you might be able to. Miranda Maverick inside the distance is a lock. Now next at 9,200 we have Jake Hadley. He's expensive. He's fighting Carlos Candelario this week. The line is wide. Jake Hadley was talking a lot of hoopla before his UFC debut with Alan Nascimento, and he looked like a turtle on his back. He had absolutely no answer for the ground game of Nascimento, and in that fight he landed a whopping 8 significant strikes. Abysmal. And he actually does have solid experience outside of the UFC. He's not one of these guys that has just crushed absolute cans outside of the biggest promotion in the world. He's done well for himself. So we expected him to look a lot better in his UFC debut, but he looked like a fish out of water on the mat, and that was a surprise considering what he's done grappling in the past. Now on the other side we have Carlos Candelario. He's faced some tough guys in the UFC like Victor Altamirano, most recently Tatsuro Taira, and he drops both of those fights. He loses both of those fights, but what you see in those fights is that Carlos Candelario can hang. He can hang on the feet and he can hang in the grappling department, and he's tough. That's one thing that really stood out to me when I watched the Tatsuro Taira fight. He had multiple reversals against Tatsuro. He had multiple reversals in his Contender Series fight. The dude is slippery. He's like an eel.
Hey, Mr. Eel, you're slippery. Oops.
He's going to be looking for takedowns himself, and he's got a good gas tank. What Carlos Candelario is lacking in skill, he's making up for in heart, and I think those are things that can give Jake Hadley trouble. And I'm willing to take a shot on the cheap underdog here with Carlos Candelario, given how bad Jake Hadley looked in his UFC debut. And you have to think, Carlos Candelario, he's fighting for a roster spot. He's going to fight his heart out, and I think Carlos Candelario, by decision, is very, very sneaky this week. Next at 9,100, we have Mario Bautista. He's fighting Benito Lopez, who we haven't seen in quite some time. Bautista is coming off the destruction of Boom Kelleher, where he leaned once again on his grappling. This is going to be for the second straight fight that he leaned on his grappling, and I expect him to grapple a ton this week. And I say that because Benito Lopez hasn't really been tested in the clinch that much, and I think that Mario Bautista is going to be able to expose him. If we look at some of the guys that Benito Lopez has fought, Vince Morales didn't have any takedown attempts against him. Manny Bermudez made quick work of him on the mat. Albert Morales only attempted one takedown, and Steve Peterson, he got him down a couple of times, but Steve Peterson wrestles like Jordan Burroughs if Jordan Burroughs never wrestled before. What I like in the favor in this fight is that Bautista fights smart, and we have to assume that he's going to take the path of least resistance here. He's going to get the win this week, and he should secure multiple takedowns or find a finish on the mat, so I expect around 90 plus DraftKings points in his effort this week, and I think that'll be more than enough with a week that the fantasy scoring is probably going to be pretty low. I don't think you're going to see a super high score in the winning lineup this week. I think there are going to be a lot of decisions this week, a lot of people that come in at high ownership that go to decision, and not a whole lot of fighters breaking 100 points. Not to mention, some of these fights still may fall through. I don't know if what's going on in Brazil is going to get rid of any more of these fights, but we're looking at a situation where we might not have 12 fights come Saturday. But the pick for me in this fight is Mario Bautista. I think that he gets it done inside the distance. I wouldn't be surprised if he found a submission. Next at 9,000, we have Grant Dawson. He's going to be fighting Marco Madsen this week. Grant Dawson has put on grappling clinic after grappling clinic in his UFC career so far. He's crazy strong, pushes a heavy pace, and I think he overwhelms the Olympian in this fight. Now, Mark Madsen is one of the best wrestlers in the division when he's fresh, but he does have cardio issues. He isn't much of a finisher, and he fights like he's trying to get the win, but not exactly trying to dominate his opponent. He wants to preserve his perfect record, and I understand, but he fights not to lose, and you can't do that against somebody as aggressive as Grant Dawson successfully. I don't think it's going to work. To beat Grant Dawson, it's going to take a lot. You're going to have to pack a lunch. You're going to have to match his pace, land heavy shots on the feet, and have elite submission defense. Mark Madsen is good, but he doesn't have that in his locker. The way that this fight goes, I think we have a competitive first round, then Madsen's cardio abandons him, say halfway through the second, and then Grant Dawson finishes him off in the third round with a rear naked choke. I think he breaks Mark Madsen. I think we see the Olympian quit. Cardio is king when it comes to MMA, so give me the guy with the higher motor, the deeper gas tank. Give me Grant Dawson inside the distance. Now, before we get into our next fighter, if you don't mind, like the video, subscribe to the channel, comment something for the algorithm. You know how that algorithm works by now. And you guys did a fantastic job with that last week. Thank you very much. Next at 8,900, we have Shayilan Nuerdanbieke. He's going to be fighting Derrick Minner this week. Nuerdanbieke, after round 1, KOs Minner. Guaranteed. Derrick Minner has 1 round of gas and a nasty submission game. He's also coming into this fight with a 72% takedown accuracy, while Nuerdanbieke isn't great at defending takedowns. And I want to be consistent because if cardio is king, Nuerdanbieke should win here, and he should score pretty well on Draftkings if he finds a finish in the second round. He probably comes in pretty low owned as well, so that makes him decent leverage, but if we're taking risks here, if we're gambling, then there's no better risk on this card than Derrick Minner, in my opinion. This is a high risk, high reward situation.
If you ain't first, you're last. You know?
Because realistically, Derrick Minner could come out here, get a takedown early in the first minute or so, and come up with a submission shortly after. Down at his price, he becomes the best point per dollar play on the entire slate if that is the outcome. So on one hand, you have a guy who's going to come out really hot and maybe finish this fight early. On the other side, you have a guy who's got much better gas tank and is going to finish this fight late. So, makes it pretty easy for us. Easy in that we know we need to choose one of these guys. You're going to need Nuerdanbieke or you're going to need Minner in your lineup. You just need to choose which one. If you play something like the $3 20 max, I would suggest going 10 Minner, 10 Nuerdanbieke. I think that makes a lot of sense. Because when you're playing a lot of lineups like that, especially in that contest specifically, you're not worried about all of your lineups cashing. You're worried about one taking down first, so you might as well spread out that exposure, and I think an even spread of the exposure is okay. In my single entry this week, I do think that I'm taking a risk. I do think that I'm rolling the dice on Derrick Minner. The pick for me is going to be Derrick Minner by submission. I don't feel good about it, but normally when you don't feel good about it is when it comes through. Now you might be thinking, Kunith, you just said that there's going to be a lot of decisions on this card and the winning lineup probably isn't going to have a super high score. If you are thinking that, good for you, you're paying attention. And I stand by that because this is where we're going to start to get into those fights that are probably going to go the distance and the point totals aren't going to be crazy high. Like here with our main event at 8,800, we have the uncrowned queen, the best strawweight on the planet, Marina Rodriguez. She's going to be fighting Amanda Lemos this week, and our girl's going to pick up yet another win on her way to a championship fight. And she's going to do what she always does. She's going to feed a steady diet of straight punches down the middle, and she's eventually, I think maybe in the 4th and maybe 5th round, finish Amanda Lemos. She's got some advantages here. She's got an advantage in height. She's also got an advantage in experience. Lemos did fight Andrade. That didn't last very long. We saw how that went. But resume for resume, Marina Rodriguez has fought the higher level competition and has had more success against this higher level competition, and on top of that has 5-round experience. So putting together a 4-fight win streak against Amanda Hebosh, Michelle Waterson, Mackenzie Dern, Yao Xiaonan, I mean, that's a pretty good list. And she fights as well in the first round as she does in the third round. Amanda Lemos throws everything into her strikes, and I think that's what we're going to see. We're going to see her try to take Marina Rodriguez's head off. But that power is going to fade the longer that the fight goes, and Marina Rodriguez is going to look stronger by comparison. She's She's going to steal rounds based on volume, and she probably scores just below 90 points in a decision win like we've seen in her last 2 main event W's. She's never scored over 100 points in her UFC career. We saw that she hit 100 once in her second fight ever, but outside of that, she's actually operated below 90 points even in these wins. I think Marina Rodriguez wins. I think that she is somebody who's going to be really chalky on DraftKings, and she's a safe play for sure. So in my opinion, she's not a must roster in your lineups, and I think by not playing her, you're going to get very different. But the pick for me in this fight is Marina Rodriguez. I don't know if I want to go late finish or decision. I'll leave that up to you. You tell me in the comments what you think. Next at 8,700, we have Johnny Munoz Jr. He's fighting Liudvik Sholinian this week. We picked Munoz to upset Tony Gravely last time out, and ultimately we were gravely upset. He shoots for a takedown. Tony Gravely hits him with an uppercut on his way in, KOs him in the first minute and 8 seconds, and that's how long it took for me to lose my single entry. Rest in peace. But the reason we picked him in that fight is because of the clash of styles, right? He's got good BJJ, he's got good jiu-jitsu, he's got a solid ground game, and Tony Gravely tends to lose by submission. And Tony Gravely typically shoots a lot of takedowns, so we thought perfect storm. It didn't work out. He got slept like we mentioned, but he's not quite on the burger list yet. I still have faith in Johnny Munoz. I still think that he can string together some wins in the UFC as long as he is matched up in favorable spots. This to me against Sholinian looks like a favorable spot because Sholinian likes to wrestle, he's going to shoot for takedowns, and I see him losing this fight on the mat. And I say that because I see Munoz throwing up a lot of submission attempts, looking for reversals and sweeps to improve position, racking up control time once he gets in a good position, and even if he doesn't find a submission, he's probably going to score a decent amount of points just from being on top. I expect him to be a little bit more patient in this fight after his quick knockout loss last time out though, and he should be more comfortable on the feet this week against Sholinian than he was against Gravely because Sholinian doesn't have that one-shot knockout power like Tony G. On DraftKings, he probably goes lower owned, and it's for good reason. I think a lot of people are going to go with the underdog. I'm not going to attack this fight. I do think that Johnny Munoz could find a submission, but I think the most likely outcome is Johnny Munoz wins a decision. He's not someone I'm dying to put in my lineups this week, but I think that Johnny Munoz by decision is very sneaky, and I think that he probably scores around 80 DraftKings points. Next at 8,600 is somebody who I think is going to go overlooked this week, Tagir Ulanbekov. He's fighting Nate Maness or Nate Maness. Nate Maness is cutting down to 125 pounds. Not a good look for a guy who's 5'10 with a 72-inch reach. That dude is huge. Too huge. The guy is almost as long as Kamaru Usman fighting at 125. It's ridiculous. And I think the weight cut can be really rough for him. Who knows if he even makes the weight. So you're going to want to monitor this fight closely if you're watching this video early in the week. And I think that Nate Maness has a terrible matchup this week against Ulanbekov because Ulanbekov is a pretty strong grappler in his own right. But more importantly, he's coming from the same camp as Umar Nurmagomedov, who just dominated Nate Maness for 15 minutes. So that connection, that experience in camp, that's going to be huge for Tagir going into this matchup, and I expect him to win a decision this week. I don't think that a finish is on the table for Ulanbekov. He's not much of a finisher as we've seen in the UFC so far, and on top of that, if Umar Nurmagomedov wasn't finishing this guy, I don't think that Tagir Ulanbekov's going to finish this guy. Because Tagir Ulanbekov couldn't finish a Krabby Patty meal.
One pipsqueak patty.
But I do see about 80 to 90 points in his future, maybe a little bit less, so proceed with caution if you want to put him in your lineups. But Tagir Ulanbekov, low-owned, favorable matchup, high decision, give me that. Next at 8,500, another fighter that's probably going to come in under-owned is Tamires Vidal, making her UFC debut. She's fighting Ramona Pascual this week. Ramona Pascual is on the burger list. She's the queen of the burger list, right up there with Gina Mazzani. They're both fighting poorly at the top of the list with one another. If Gina Mazzani hasn't been cut yet, which I think she has, I'm not sure, then Ramona Pascual is pound for pound probably the worst fighter on the roster. In Pascual's last fight against Jocelyn Edwards, she had an abysmal performance. She saw more kicks than a footlocker in that fight and did nothing about it. She barely attempted takedowns in that fight, and that was the only path to victory for her, and she looked more than a step behind the entire time. She's 34. She got started fighting later in life, if memory memory serves me correct, and she's one loss away from being cut. Enter Tamires Vidal, sitting at 24 years old on a 5-fight win streak. Her only loss in her career is coming to Karol Hoza, and that was in her second fight ever 3 years ago, which would have made her 21. Not bad. I expect her to grapple heavily in this fight. She should have success getting Pascual down, and I see her finishing this fight in the second round with a submission or ground and pound. On DraftKings, she flies way under the radar. Too many unknowns. Nobody knows who this is. She's fighting Ramona Pascual, and she's around 8,500 when you can get other people around her price, and you're probably going to be doing a lot of stars and scrubs. At least that's what you'll see this week. She goes under-owned, no question about it. But I think this is actually a really decent price for somebody who, frankly, was signed to the UFC and fed Ramona Pascual to beat her up. So give me Tamires Vidal inside the distance. I think that she probably again wins in the second round. Next at 8,400 we have Magny. He's going to be fighting D-Rod this week. He's got his hands full, man. He's got his hands full. This is an awesome clash of styles. Magny is a control guy, right? He likes to use his long frame to clinch guys, wear out his opponents, take them down if possible, and he's such a veteran. He's seen it all. He's fought 27 times in the UFC. But on the other side, there's a junkyard dog in Daniel Rodriguez who throws hammers. He's accurate, his hands are fast, and he's aggressive. I worry that Magny doesn't have enough power to get respect on the feet, and I think that he could find himself getting clipped at some point. And the difference in output between these two is stark, right? Daniel Rodriguez is landing nearly 8 significant strikes per minute compared to Magny, who's landing less than 4. Going by the numbers, you would think that D-Rod's going to come in here and double him up on strikes and probably hit him with twice as much power. That's not a good look for Magny at all. And D-Rod has solid enough takedown defense where I think he's going to be able to successfully keep the feet. And from a DraftKings perspective, Magny hasn't exactly been DraftKings gold when he's winning these decisions. You see here 75, 72. He has 100 points in his decision win over Robbie Lawler, but that's 4 takedowns, 8 minutes of control time. He ain't doing that to D-Rod. 63 points in a decision win there. Again, 4 takedowns over a whole round of control time against the Leech. He ain't doing that to D-Rod. He is in the co-main event, and I do think that most people are going to go with the underdog in this fight. So Daniel Rodriguez is the pick. Daniel Rodriguez by decision is the pick. I expect a lot of people to get there. Personally, I don't think that I'll find myself getting to this fight. Again, Magny could get clipped, but also he's not going to show Magny anything he hasn't seen before, and Magny should have success in spots, pushing him up against the cage, times ripping off the clock. D-Rod's not able to get off as many punches as he normally does. I don't see him going north of 100 significant strikes, so he probably wins a decision, probably doesn't score that many points, goes way over owned. Next at 8,300 we have Polyana Viana. She's going to be fighting Jinh Frey this week. She's coming off a loss to Baby Shark Tabitha Ricci, where Ricci just took her down. She would attempt submissions and they were all nullified, and that was just rinse and repeat for the entire fight. Those who can stay safe in her guard are going to be just fine when they're fighting her. I think Frey can hang out in her guard without being submitted. I think that Frey is smart enough to do that. Frey should be the better striker here. She's going to be stronger physically in the clinch, and she's thoughtful. She's smart. I expect her to come in with a good game plan and stick to it, because on the feet, Viana doesn't offer very much at all, and if Frey wants to strike, she's going to be okay. Viana doesn't have much of a wrestling game to fall back on either to get the fight where she needs it for her to win. If this fight goes to the ground, it's going to be on Frey's terms. She's going to be on top, and all she needs to do is just stay safe in her guard. If anything, Frey should try to get her down, pass her guard, sit in half guard for as long as she can, because it's harder to get something off in half guard than it is full guard. I think that would be the most intelligent way for her to approach the fight. And really, I don't think Viana's all that good. I really don't. I expect her to struggle this week. The only way she wins this fight is by catching Frey with a sub from the bottom, and I don't know if that's going to happen. So give me Jinh Frey. Give me Jinh Frey by decision. She probably doesn't score a ton of fantasy points, but I do think that she gets the win. And then the last matchup that we're going to cover before we start building lineups is Chase Sherman versus Josh Parisian. This is fantastic. Low-level heavyweight MMA fight for the UFC is some of the best combat sports you can watch, because these dudes are going to get tired. They're going to be throwing bombs at each other. One of them's going to get finished, and he's coming off a nice win over Jared Vanderaa. We talked about this a little bit last week with Vanderaa on the card. That was back and forth. Both of those dudes had a ton of success. Both looked like they were going to finish it at different times. Ultimately, Chase Sherman finds the finishing blow. And it was nice to see from Chase Sherman, because he dug deep in spots. He looked really sharp on the feet, and he showed up in a must-win spot. The dude dude was fighting for his job basically and was able to get the win that he needed. But I don't want us to be fooled by recency bias. Chase Sherman stringing together wins in the UFC is like a black guy going into LL Bean. It doesn't happen. And on the other side of this matchup, I think that Josh Parisian has way more tools to get this done. I think he's a much better, well-rounded fighter, and I think that if he gets the fight to the mat, he's probably going to finish it. Because realistically, all he needs to do is get the fight down to the mat one time, and I think he's in a great spot. I say that because Chase Sherman doesn't have great takedown defense. Josh Parisian's a big dude. If he's able to stay on top, it's going to sap Chase Sherman's already poor gas tank. And as long as he focuses on position over submission and stays heavy on top, I think he has a lot of success, and I think he ultimately finishes this fight. I think people should be rostering this fight. This is heavyweight MMA. I think that this fight does not go the distance. I would take the under in this one. I think that Josh Parisian probably wins. I would hope people roster this fight, but you never know. Sometimes when you look at guys like this, you just think, oh, they're so low level, I don't want to put my money on it. A lot of people think that way, and as a result, they miss out on something like this. But I mean, this guy put up 120 against Alain Badeau. So give me Josh Parisian this week. Give me Josh Parisian inside the distance. Well, now we can get into building some lineups. I'm going to start with what your cash game lineups should look like this week. I think there's two ways to go about it. You can tweak it, but these are the two ways that I think make the most sense. If you want to plug Miranda Maverick in there, by all means, plug Miranda Maverick in there. I'm also going to go here and I'm going to stack the main event just because that's going to give us the nice scoring floor. Now, again, this is just for cash games. If you're playing 50-50s, head-to-heads, double-ups, this is what I think that you should come with, but don't stack the main event in your tournaments. Those of you that have been watching for a while, you know that, but we get new people watching every week. I want to make sure we're inclusive. We got 8,700 left over. This is where we just attack the mid-range with Vidal. We go here to Ulanbekov. I'm happy with that. Another way that we could approach it is if we came to the main event, we stack the main event. So we grab Rodriguez, we come to Lemos. Now, if we grab two underdogs that we feel good about, we can grab D-Rod, we can grab Jinh Frey. Now we've got over 9,000 left over. We can grab Grant Dawson, we can grab Mario Bautista. There you go. If you wanted to take, say, Mario Bautista out, you wanted to get up here to Miranda Maverick, then you would just have to come down from one of these underdogs here. What you could even do, let's say you don't have a whole lot of faith in Amanda Lemos, if you were to take her out, you can come all the way down here and grab somebody like Carlos Candelario. And I don't think this would just only work for cash games. I think this would work for tournaments as well, which brings us to our next piece, which, what do you do in tournaments? I think you could get away with something like this. My issue with this, though, because the lineup needs to be able to tell a story, you're looking at a situation where Miranda Maverick, okay, she's going to get the job done. Grant Dawson, same thing, historically scores very well. Jinh Frey doesn't typically score that well. D-Rod's in a matchup where he's going to come in at high ownership against the tough guy and he might not finish him. Carlos Candelario, for your tournaments, I don't mind you playing him at all. Marina Rodriguez, super high ownership, main event favorite, sizable favorite in the main event, the best straw weight on the planet. Tell Wei Li we're coming. Tell Wei Li Zhang we're coming for her, alright? But she might not score that well on Draftkings this week compared to some other spots that you can get to. So, let's take out Frey, let's take out D-Rod, let's take out Marina Rodriguez, and how do we fix this? How do we finagle this? Well, if we're going based on what we were just talking about and the picks that look okay from earlier, I think that you can come down here to Derrick Minner, you can come grab Josh Parisian, and now you've got a situation where you've got 9,300 left over. You can come up here to Mario Bautista. This is stars and scrubs, but this is probably something that you could get away with. Or instead of taking these two, if we just took them out, you could start to attack that mid-range a little bit more heavily. So you could come here to somebody like Vidal, you could come here to somebody like Ulanbekov, for example. You've left 200 salary on the table. I think this is fine. Let's say you didn't like the Candelario pick and you wanted to come down from these guys to make it work. Well, then I think what we could do is plug Josh Parisian in at 8,000, and now you've got 800 that you need to account for. So what we're going to do is take Tagir out of there. We're going to take Miranda Maverick out of there as well. We're going to come down here to Mario Bautista, so that should leave us with 8,100. Perfect. Now this is a situation where you could grab somebody like D-Rod hoping that he finds a knockout. You can grab Frey knowing that she's going to come in pretty low owned. And outside of that, I don't really feel great about many of the underdogs that are left. But if you had to take a flyer on somebody that you think might be able to get it done, well, Johnny Munoz Jr., I mean, he's not a stone cold lock by any means. You've left some salary on the table. I think that's perfectly fine. Now, what do I think will be chalk this week? What's everybody going to do this week? I think they're going to plug in Marina Rodriguez. I think they're going to get that Rodriguez connection here. M-Rod, D-Rod. I think Sholinian's going to get a decent amount of love this week. I think Josh Parisian or Chase Sherman is going to get a lot of love this week. Let's say people decide to go with Chase Sherman at 8,200 after his more recent performance. Well, now you have 8,850 left over per fighter, so you can come up here and you could start to flirt with this range a little bit. You've got Miranda Maverick, who's on the table, Mario Bautista, Grant Dawson. What I think that a lot of people would do if this is what they were left with is they would probably come to somebody like an Ulanbekov and then they'd go up to Mario Bautista or they'd go up to Grant Dawson. If I were to reverse engineer this a little bit, I think I would take Chase Sherman out of there. I think I would go down to Josh Parisian. I think I would take Marina Rodriguez out of there and I would go up to Mario Bautista. I don't hate this. Maybe come down from Sholinian, go grab somebody like Carlos Candelario, leave 500 salary on the table. Leave it. You'd be surprised how well you can do in tournaments by leaving salary on the table. It's a good way to get different. And MMA is not like other sports. It's not like NFL or NBA where spending a lot of the salary is almost required. In NFL, for example, the metrics are different. They're different scoring that you could expect from different guys. If you pay $8,000 for a receiver, he's probably going to score more than a receiver that you paid $3,000 for. But with MMA, it's different because the outcomes, they're a lot tighter. There are a lot fewer things that could happen. You could win by decision, by knockout, or submission. Realistically, you could win by decision or get a finish. The draw is rare, it's occasional, but more often than not, you're looking at a situation where you finish the fight or you've got a decision win. So when people win fights, outside of Johan Lioness a couple of months ago, when people win fights, they're normally scoring anywhere between about 70 to 100 points. Now, sometimes people score above 100 points, sometimes people score below 70, but the meat of that bell curve is going to be between 70 and 100 points. So if your people win, they're probably going to score pretty well, and the scoring's going to be a lot closer unless somebody's scored a bunch of knockdowns or a lot of takedowns, or they just completely swept the person that was on top of them every time they got put in a bad position. So just keep that in mind. Don't be afraid to leave salary on the table. That's a good way for you to get different. Let's say I took D-Rod out of here and I came all the way down here to Derrick Minner. I don't see a whole lot wrong with this. If anything, you probably would come off of Tagir and you'd come up here to play Miranda Maverick. You've left 200 salary on the table, and this is a lot closer to what most people are going to do. I might have even made this lineup a minute ago, but I'm telling you now, if you were to leave, say, 1,000 or 1,100 salary on the table in that big contest, you're very different. Nobody's doing this, and this has just as good a chance of hitting as if you were to use all the salary. Now, what if we use a good amount of the salary, but we still want to get different and attack some people that are probably going to go lower owned? Well, I think if you limited yourself to letting Nuerdanbieke be your most expensive play this week, that's a good way to get different. Let's say you went with Nuerdanbieke there, you came down to Ulanbekov, Vidal, you came to Josh Parisian, for example, and then you have to come down here and you have to grab some underdogs, or you can grab Carlos Candelario, and then you can come back up here to somebody like Johnny Munoz. Ain't nobody playing this, I can promise you that. So just some ways for you to approach it. If you'd like, you can send me your lineups on Twitter at Kunith MMA. It will be linked in the description. You can follow me there, shoot me a message, send me a picture of the lineup, tell me what contest you're in, and I'll tell you what I think. Now, we'll quickly wrap up by just going over the picks for the card, as well as some prop opportunities. I'm not going to be able to show you on the screen props for all these fights, but that's just because they aren't out yet on DraftKings Sportsbook. But what we can do is just look at a couple that I think make sense. Vidal inside the distance, I think, looks really good this week. Candelario by decision, or just the over in this fight, I think look really good. Jinh Frey by decision is probably going to come in around plus 200. I think that would be nice, maybe even more than that. Miranda Maverick at minus 600. I don't think you want any part of that. I think you would take Miranda Maverick inside the distance. And then Tagir Ulanbekov by decision, I think makes a ton of sense, as well as Marina Rodriguez by decision. And to quickly go through the card for you, I like Vidal, I like Candelario, I like Munoz, I like Frey, I like Bautista, Maverick, Minner. We're looking at Grant Dawson. We're looking at Tagir Ulanbekov, Josh Parisian, D-Rod, Marina Rodriguez. That's where we'll land this week. If you've made it to this point in the video, thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. Make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel, comment something for the algorithm, send me your stuff on Twitter if you want. I'm going to make a private contest as well. I link that right in the pinned comment of this video. $1 winner take all. Let's see who's got the guts.